Daisuke drew him a little to one side and spoke in a whisper. When he returned to his guest, Sato said, "Why don't you go back now? I would hate to put you to any more trouble." After watching them until they were out of sight, Daisuke said to the priest, "How could you be so stupid? Don't you know enough to open your eyes before you open your mouth? My father wouldn't be pleased to hear about this." "Yes, sir, I'm sorry, I didn't know." Despite his robes, the man was no priest. He was Toriumi Benzo, one of Yukimura's leading retainers. The port. "Konosuke, Konosuke, Konosuke." Iori couldn't seem to stop himself. He called the name over and over and over. Having found some of Konosuke's belongings lying on the ground, he was convinced the man was dead. A day and a night had passed. He had been in a walking daze, oblivious of his weariness. His legs, hands, and head were spattered with blood, his kimono badly torn. Seized by a spasm, he would look up at the sky and cry, "I'm ready," or stare at the ground and curse. "Have I gone crazy?" he thought, suddenly feeling cold. Looking into a puddle of water, he recognized his own face and felt relieved. But he was alone, with no one to turn to, only half believing he was still alive. When he had awoken at the bottom of the ravine, he couldn't remember where he had been the past several days. It didn't occur to him to try to go back to the Kongoji or Koyagyu. An object glinting with the colors of the rainbow caught his eye, a, a pheasant. He became aware of the fragrance of wild wisteria in the air and sat down. As he tried to make sense of his situation, thoughts of the sand captured his mind. He imagined it as being everywhere, beyond the clouds, among the peaks in the valleys. He shifted to a kneeling position, clasped his hands, shut his eyes, and began praying. When he opened his eyes a few minutes later, the first thing he saw was a glimpse of ocean, blue and misty, between two mountains. "Little boy," said a motherly voice, "are you all right?" "Huh?" With a start, Iori turned his hollow eyes toward the two women who were staring at him curiously. "What do you suppose is wrong with him, mother?" asked the younger woman, regarding Iori with distaste. Looking puzzled, the older woman walked over to Iori, and seeing the blood on his clothes, she frowned. "Don't those cuts hurt?" she asked. Iori shook his head. She turned to her daughter and said, "He seems to understand what I say." They asked his name, where he had come from, where he had been born, what he was doing here, and whom he had been praying to. Little by little, as he searched around for the answers, his memory came back. More sympathetic now, the daughter, whose name was Otsuru, said, "Let's take him back to Sakai with us. Maybe he will be useful in the shop. He's just the right age." "That might be a good idea," said her mother, Ose. "Will he come? He will come, won't you?" Iori nodded and said, "Uh-huh. Come along then, but you will have to carry our luggage." "Ah." Iori acknowledged their remarks with a grunt, but otherwise said nothing on the journey down the mountain, along a country road and into Kishiwada. But among people again, he became talkative. "Where do you live?" he asked. "In Sakai. Is that near here?" "No, it's near Osaka." "Where's Osaka?" "We will take a ship from here and go to Sakai, then you will know." "Really? A ship?" Excited by the prospect, he rattled on for several minutes, telling them how he had ridden any number of ferry boats on the way from Edo to Yamato. but though the ocean wasn't far from his birthplace in Shimosa, he had never been out to sea in a ship. "That will make you happy then, won't it?" said Otsuru. "But you mustn't call my mother auntie, say madame when you speak to her, aunt. And you mustn't answer say yes, ma'am, that's better. Now, if you stay with us and work hard, I will see you are made a shop assistant." "What does your family do?" "My father's a shipping broker." "What's that?" "He's a merchant. He owns a lot of ships and they sail all over western Japan." "Oh, just a merchant?" sniffed Iori. "Just a merchant? Why?" exclaimed the girl. The mother was inclined to overlook Iori's bluntness, but the daughter was indignant. Then she hesitated, saying, "I suppose he has never seen merchants other than candy sellers or clothing salesmen." The fierce pride of the Kansai merchants took over, and she informed him that her father had 3 warehouses, large ones, in Sakai and several tens of vessels. She gave him to understand that there were branch offices in Shimonoseki, Marukami, and Shikama, and that the services performed for the house of Hosokawa in Kokura were of such great importance that her father's ships had the status of official vessels. And she went on, "He's allowed to have a surname and carry 2 swords like a samurai. Everyone in western Honshu and Kyushu knows the name of Kobayashi Tarozaemon of Shimonoseki. In time of war, daimyo like Shimazu and Hosokawa never have enough ships. So my father is just as important as a general." "I didn't mean to make you angry," said Iori. The 2 women laughed. "We are not angry," said Otsuru, "but a boy like you, what do you know of the world? I'm sorry." Turning a corner, they were greeted by the tang of salt air. Otsuru pointed to a ship tied up at Kishiwada Pier. It had a capacity of 500 bushels and was loaded with local produce. "That's the ship we will go home in," she said proudly. The ship captain and a couple of Kobayashi agents came out of a dockside tea house to meet them. "Did you have a nice walk?" asked the captain. "I'm sorry to say we are very heavily loaded, so I couldn't keep much space open for you. Shall we go on board?" He led the way to the stern of the ship, where a space had been partitioned off with curtains. A red rag had been spread, and elegant Momoyama-style lacquer utensils contained an abundance of food and sake. Iori had the feeling he was entering a small, well-appointed room in a daimyo's mansion. The ship reached Sakai in the evening after an uneventful voyage up Osaka Bay. The travelers went directly to the Kobayashi establishment, facing the wharf, where they were welcomed by the manager, a man named Sahe, and a large group of assistants who had gathered at the spacious entrance. As Osei was going into the house, she turned and said, "Sahe, will you look after the child, please?" "You mean the dirty little urchin who came off the ship?" "Yes, he seems quick-witted, so you should be able to put him to work and do something about his clothes. He may have lice. See that he washes well and give him a new kimono, then he can go to bed." Iori didn't see the mistress of the house or her daughter for the next few days. There was a half-length curtain separating the office from the living quarters in the back. It was like a wall. Without special permission, not even Sahe dared go beyond it. Iori was given a corner of the shop, as the office was called, in which to sleep. And though he was grateful for being rescued, he soon became dissatisfied with his new way of life. The cosmopolitan atmosphere in which he had been dropped had a certain fascination. He gaped at the foreign innovations he saw on the streets, at the ships in the harbor, and the signs of prosperity evident in the way people lived. But it was always, "Hey boy, do this, do that." From the lowest assistant to the manager, they made him chase around like a dog. Not at all like their attitude when speaking to a member of the household or a customer. Then they turned into fawning sycophants, and from morning to night they talked of many, many. If it was not that, it was walk, walk. And they called themselves human beings, thought Iori. He longed for the blue sky and the smell of warm grass under the sun and decided any number of times to run away. The yearning was strongest when he remembered Musashi talking about ways of nourishing the spirit. He visualized how Musashi had looked and the face of the departed Konosuke and Otsu. Matters came to a head one day when Sahe called, "Io, Io, where are you?" Getting no answer, he stood up and walked to the black lacquered keyaki beam forming the threshold of the office. "You there, the new boy," he shouted. "Why don't you come when you are called?" Iori was sweeping the walk between the office and the storehouse. He looked up and asked, "Were you calling me?" "Were you calling me, sir? I see." "I see, sir." "Yes, sir." "Don't you have ears? Why didn't you answer me?" "I heard you say Io. That couldn't be me. My name is Iori, sir." "Eo's enough. And another thing, I told you the other day to stop wearing that sword." "Yes, sir." "Give it to me." Iori hesitated a moment, then said, "It's a keepsake from my father. I couldn't let go of it." "Impudent brat, give it to me." "I don't want to be a merchant anyway." "If it weren't for merchants, people couldn't live," Sahe said forcefully. "Who will bring in goods from foreign countries? Nobunaga and Hideyoshi are great men, but they couldn't have built all those castles, Azuchi, Jurakudai, Fushimi, without the help of merchants. Just look at the men here in Sakai, Nemban, Ruzon, Fuki, and Amoi. They are all carrying on trade on a large scale." "I know that. How would you know?" "Anybody can see the big weaving houses of Ayamachi, Kinumachi, and Nishikimachi, and up on the hill, Rusonya's establishment looks like a castle. There are rows and rows of warehouses and mansions belonging to rich merchants. This place, well, I know Madame and Otsuru are proud of it, but it doesn't amount to anything by comparison." "Why, you little son of a bitch!" Sahe was barely out the door before Iori had dropped his broom and fled. Sahe summoned some dog walkers and ordered them to catch him. When Iori was dragged back, Sahe was fuming. "What can you do with a boy like that? He talks back and makes fun of all of us. Punish him good today." Going back into the office, he added, "Take that sword away from him." They removed the offending weapon and tied Iori's hands behind him. When they fastened the rope to a large crate of cargo, Iori looked like a monkey on a leash. "Stay there a while," said one of the men, smirking. "Let people make fun of you." The others guffawed and went back to their work. There was nothing Iori hated more than this. How often Musashi and Konosuke had admonished him not to do things he might be ashamed of. First he tried pleading, then promised to mend his ways. When this proved ineffective, he switched to invective. The manager's a fool, crazy old fart. Let me loose and give me back my sword. I won't stay in a house like this. Sahe came out and shouted, "Quiet!" He then tried to gag Iori, but the boy bit his finger. So he gave up and had the dog walkers do it. Iori tugged at his bonds, pulling this way and that. Already under a terrible strain from being exposed to public view, he burst into tears when a horse urinated and the foamy liquid trickled toward his feet. As he was quieting down, he saw something that almost made him faint. On the other side of a horse was a young woman, her head protected from the sweltering sun by a broad-brimmed lacquer hat. Her hemp kimono was tied up for traveling, and she carried a thin bamboo pole. In vain he tried to cry out her name. Stretching his neck out, he almost choked with the effort. His eyes were dry, but his shoulders shook with his sobbing. It was maddening. Otsu was so near. Where was she going? Why had she left Edo? Later in the day, when a ship tied up at the pier, the neighborhood became even busier. "Sahe, what's this boy doing out there, looking like a trained bear on exhibit? It's cruel to leave him like that. It's also bad for business." The man calling into the office was a cousin of Tarozeman. He was usually called Nambaya, the name of the shop where he worked. Black pockmarks added a certain sinisterness to the anger in his face. Despite his appearance, he was a friendly man and often gave sweets to Iori. "I don't care if you are punishing him," he continued. "It's not right to do it out on the street. It's bad for the Kobayashi name, and tie him." "Yes, sir," Sahe complied immediately, all the while regaling Nambaya with a detailed account of how useless Iori was. "If you don't know what to do with him," said Nambaya, "I will take him home with me. I will speak to Osei about it today." The manager, fearing the consequences when the mistress of the house heard what had happened, suddenly had an urge to soothe Iori's feelings. Iori, for his part, wouldn't have anything to do with the man for the rest of the day. On his way out that evening, Nambaya stopped in Iori's corner of the shop. A little drunk, but in high spirits, he said, "Well, you won't be going with me after all. The women wouldn't hear of it, huh?" His conversation with Osei and Otsuru did have one salutary effect, however. The very next day, Iori entered a temple school in the neighborhood. He was allowed to wear his sword to school, and neither Sahe nor the others gave him further trouble. But still he was unable to settle down. When he was inside, his eyes often strayed to the street. Every time a young woman even remotely like Otsu passed, his color changed. Sometimes he ran out for a closer look. One morning toward the beginning of the 9th month, a prodigious quantity of luggage began arriving by riverboat from Kyoto. By midday, chests and baskets were piled high in front of the office. Tags identified the property as that of samurai in the house of Hosokawa. They had been in Kyoto on business similar to that which had brought Sado to Mount Koya, looking after the posthumous affairs of Hosokawa Yusai. Now they sat drinking barley tea and fanning themselves, some in the office, some under the eaves outside. Coming back from school, Iori got as far as the street. He stopped and turned pale. Kojiro, seated atop a large basket, was saying to Sahe, "It's too hot out here. Hasn't our ship docked yet?" Sahe looked up from the manifest in his hands and pointed toward the pier. "Your ship is the Tatsumimaru. It's right over there. As you can see, they haven't finished loading, so your places on board aren't ready yet. I'm sorry." "I'd much prefer to wait on board. It should be a little cooler there." "Yes, sir. I'll go and see how things are coming along." Too rushed to wipe the sweat from his forehead, he scurried out to the street, where he caught sight of Iori. "What are you doing here? What are you doing there, looking as though you had swallowed a ramrod? Go and wait on the passengers. Barley tea, cold water, hot water, give them whatever they want." Iori went to a shed at the entrance of the alley by the storehouse, where a kettle of water was kept boiling. But instead of going about his business, he stood glaring at Kojiro. He was usually called Genru now, the rather scholarly-sounding name seeming more appropriate to his present age and status. He was heavier and more solid. His face had filled out. His once piercing eyes were serene and untroubled. He no longer made frequent use of his rapier tongue, which in the past had caused so much injury. Somehow, the dignity of his sword had become a part of his personality. One result was that he had gradually been accepted by his fellow samurai. They not only spoke highly of him, but actually respected him. Pouring sweat, Sahe returned from the ship, apologized again for the long wait, and announced, "The seats amidship are still not ready, but those in the prow are." This meant the foot soldiers and younger samurai could go on board. They proceeded to gather up their belongings and left in a group. There remained only Kojiro and 6 or 7 older men, all officials of some importance in the fief. "Sado hasn't come yet, has he?" said Kojiro. "No, but he should be here before long." "We will be getting the sun from the west soon," Sahe said to Kojiro. "It will be cooler if you move inside." "The flies are terrible," complained Kojiro, "and I'm thirsty. Could I have another cup of tea?" "Right away, sir." Without getting up, Sahe shouted toward the hot water shed. "Iyo, what are you doing? Bring some tea for our guest." He busily addressed himself to his manifest again, but realizing Iori had not answered, he started to repeat his order. Then he saw the boy approaching slowly with several cups of tea on a tray. Iori offered tea to each of the samurai, bowing politely each time. Standing before Kojiro with the last 2 cups, he said, "Please have some tea." Kojiro absent-mindedly extended his hand, but abruptly withdrew it as his eyes met Iori's. Startled, he exclaimed, "Why, it's—" Breaking into a grin, Iori said, "The last time I had the bad luck to run into you was in Musashi. "What's that?" rasped Kojiro, in a tone hardly appropriate to his present status. He was about to say something else when Iori shouted, "Oh, you remember me," and slung the tray at his face. "Ow!" cried Kojiro, grabbing Iori by the wrist. Though the tray missed him, a bit of hot tea caught him in the left eye. The rest of the tea spilled onto his chest and lap. The tray crashed into a corner post. You little bastard, shouted Kojiro. He threw Iori onto the dirt floor and planted one foot on top of him. Manager, he called angrily. This brat is one of your boys, isn't he? Come here and hold him down. Even if he is only a child, I won't stand for this. Frightened out of his wits, Sahe rushed to do as he was told, but somehow Iori managed to draw his sword and take a swing at Kojiro's arm. Kojiro kicked him to the middle of the room and jumped back a pace. Sahe turned and rushed back, screaming his lungs out. He reached Iori just as the boy jumped to his feet. You keep out of this, Iori cried, then looking Kojiro straight in the face, he spat out, serves you right, and ran outside. Kojiro picked up a carrion pole that happened to be handy and threw it at the boy, scoring a perfect hit behind his knee. Iori landed flat on his face. At Sahe's command, several men fell on Iori and hauled him back to the hot water shed, where a servant was wiping off Kojiro's kimono and hakama. Please forgive this outrage, pleaded Sahe. We don't know how to apologize, said one of the assistants. Without looking at them, Kojiro took a damp towel from the servant and wiped off his face. Iori had been forced to the ground, his arms bent tightly behind him. Let me go, he begged, his body writhing in pain. I won't run away. I'm a samurai's son. I did it on purpose and I'll take my punishment like a man. Kojiro finished straightening his clothing and smoothed his hair. Let him go, he said quietly. Not knowing what to make of the placid expression on the samurai's face, Sahe stammered, are you sure it's alright? Yes, but the word sounded like a nail being driven into a board. Although I have no intention of becoming involved with a mere child, if you feel he should be punished, I can suggest a method. Pour a dipper full of boiling water over his head. It won't kill him. Boiling water. Sahe recoiled at the suggestion. Yes, if you want to let him go, that's alright too. Sahe and his men looked at each other and certainly, we can't let something like that go unpunished. He's always up to no good. He's lucky he didn't get killed. Bring a rope. When they started to tie him, Iori fought off their hands. What are you doing? He screamed, sitting on the ground. He said, I told you I wouldn't run away, didn't I? I'd take my punishment. I had a reason for doing what I did. A merchant might apologize, not me. The son of a samurai is not going to cry over a little hot water. All right, said Sahe, you asked for it. He rolled up his sleeve, filled a dipper with boiling water, and walked slowly toward Iori. Shut your eyes, Iori. If you don't, you will go blind. The voice came from across the street. Not daring to look to see whose voice it was, Iori shut his eyes. He recalled a story Musashi had told him once in Musashino. It was about Kaizen, a Zen priest highly revered by the warriors of Kai province. When Nobunaga and Ieyasu attacked Kaizen's temple and put it to the torch, the priest seated himself calmly in the upper floor of the gate and while burning to death uttered the words, if your heart is obliterated through enlightenment, the fire is cool. It's only a little dipper of hot water, Iori told himself. I mustn't think that way. He tried desperately to become a selfless void, free of delusion, without sorrows. Perhaps if he had been younger or much older. but at his age he was too much a part of the world he lived in. When was it coming? For a giddy moment he thought the sweat dripping from his forehead was boiling water. A moment seemed like 100 years. Why, it's Sardo, said Kojiro. Sahe and all the others turned and stared at the old samurai. What's going on here? Sardo asked, coming across the street with Inosuke at his side. Kojiro laughed and said lightly, "You caught us at an odd moment. They are punishing the boy." Sardo looked intently at Iori. "Punishing him? Well, if he has done something bad, he should be punished. Go right ahead, I'll watch." Sahe glanced out of the corner of his eye at Kojiro, who sized the situation up immediately and knew he was the one who would be held responsible for the severity of the punishment. "That's enough," he said. Iori opened his eyes. He had a little trouble focusing them, but when he recognized Sado, he said happily, "I know you. You are the samurai who came to the Tokuganji in Hotengahara. You remember me?" "Yes, sir. What has happened to your teacher, Musashi?" Iori sniffled and put his hands to his eyes. Sado's knowing the blind came as a shock to Kojiro. Thinking about it for a moment, he decided it must have something to do with Sado's search for Musashi. But he certainly didn't want Musashi's name to come up in a conversation between himself and the senior retainer. He knew that one of these days he would have to fight Musashi, but it was no longer a strictly private matter. In fact, a split had developed in both the main line and the branches of the House of Hosokawa. One faction thinking highly of Musashi, the other partial to the former Ronin who was now the clan's chief sword instructor. Some said the real reason the fight was inevitable was behind the scenes rivalry between Sado and Kakube. In Kojiro's relief, the boatswain of the Tatsumimaru arrived just then with word that the ship was ready. Sado, remaining behind, said, "The ship doesn't leave till sundown, does it?" "That's right," replied Sahe, who was pacing about the office, worrying about the consequences of today's affair. "I have time for a little rest then." "Plenty of time. Please have some tea." Otsuru appeared at the inner door and beckoned to the manager. After listening to her for a couple of minutes, Sahe came back to Sado and said, "The office is not really the place to receive you. It's only a step through the garden to the house. Would you mind going there?" "That's very kind," replied Sado. "To whom am I indebted? The lady of the house?" "Yes, she said she would like to thank you." "What for?" Sahe scratched his head. I, uh, I imagine foreseeing that Iori came to no harm. Since the master isn't here, speaking of Iori, I would like to talk to him. Would you call him?" The garden was what Sato would have expected in the house of a rich Sakai merchant. Though bounded on one side by a storehouse, it was a world apart from the hot, noisy office. Rocks and plants were all freshly watered, and there was a running brook. Ose and Otsuru were kneeling in a small, elegant room facing the garden. There was a wool rug on top of the tatami and trays of cakes and tobacco. Sado noticed the spicy fragrance of mixed incense. Sitting down at the edge of the room, he said, "I won't come in. My feet are dirty." While serving him tea, Ose apologized for her employees and thanked him for saving Iori. Sado said, "I had occasion some time ago to meet that boy. I'm happy to have found him again. How does it happen he is staying in your house? After hearing her explanation, Sado told her about his long search for Musashi. They chatted amiably for a while, then Sado said, I was watching Iori from across the street for several minutes. I admire his ability to remain calm. He conducted himself very well. As a matter of fact, I think it's a mistake to raise a boy with that much spirit in a merchant's establishment. I wonder if you wouldn't consent to turning him over to me. In Kokura, he would be brought up as a samurai. Osei agreed readily, saying it would be the best thing that could possibly happen to him. Otsuru got up to go look for Iori, but just then he emerged from behind a tree where he had overheard the whole conversation. Do you object to going with me? Asked Sato. Bursting with happiness, Iori begged to be taken to Kokuro. While Sato drank his tea, Otsuru got Iori ready for the trip. Kimono, hakama, leggings, basket hat, all new. It was the first time he had ever worn a hakama. That evening, as the Tatsumimaru spread its black wings and sailed forth under clouds turned golden by the setting sun, Iori looked back at a sea of faces. Otsuru's, her mother's, Sahe's, those of a large group of well-wishers, the face of the city of Sakai. With a broad smile on his face, he took off his basket hat and waved at them. The writing teacher. The sign at the entrance to a narrow alley in the fishmonger's district of Okazaki read, Enlightenment for the Young, Lessons in Reading and Writing, and bore the name Muka, who was, from all appearances, one of the many impoverished but honest ronin making a living by sharing his warrior-class education with the children of commoners. The curiously amateurish calligraphy brought a smile to the lips of passers-by, but Muka said he wasn't ashamed of it. Whenever it was mentioned, he always replied in the same way, I'm still a child at heart, I'm practicing along with the children. The alley ended in a bamboo grove, beyond which was the riding ground of the house of Honda. In fair weather, it was always covered by a cloud of dust, since the cavalrymen often practiced from dawn to dusk. The military lineage they were so proud of was that of the famous Mikawa warriors, the tradition that had produced the Tokugawas. Maku stared from his midday nap, went to the well and drew water. His solid gray and lined kimono and gray hood might well have been the dress of a man of 40, but he was in fact not yet 30. After washing his face, he walked into the grove where he cut down a thick bamboo with a single sword stroke. After washing the bamboo at the well, he went back inside. Blinds hanging on one side kept out the dust from the riding ground, but since this was the direction from which light came, the one room seemed smaller and darker than it actually was. A board lay flat in one corner. Above it hung an anonymous portrait of a Zen priest. Muka set the piece of bamboo on the board and tossed a bindweed flower into the hollow center. Not bad, he thought as he backed away to examine his work. Sitting down in front of his table, he took his brush and began practicing, using as models a manual on squarish, formal characters by Chu Sui Lian and a wrapping of the priest Kobo Daishi's calligraphy. He had evidently been progressing steadily during the year he had lived there, for the characters he wrote now were far superior to the ones on the sign. "May I trouble you?" asked the woman from next door, the wife of a man who sold writing brushes. "Come in, please," said Muka. "I only have a minute. I was just wondering. A few minutes ago I heard a loud noise. It sounded like something breaking. Did you hear it?" Muka laughed. "That was only me cutting down a piece of bamboo. Oh, I was worried. I thought something might have happened to you. My husband says the samurai prowling around here are out to kill you. It wouldn't matter if they did. I'm not worth 3 coppers. 3 coppers anyway. 3 coppers anyway. You shouldn't be so easygoing. Lots of people get killed for things they don't even remember doing. Think how sad all the girls would be if some harm came to you." She went on her way, not asking, as she often did, why don't you take a wife? It isn't that you don't like women, is it?" Muka never gave a clear answer, though he had brought it on himself by carelessly revealing enough to suggest that he would make a fine catch. His neighbors knew he was a ronin from Mimasaka who lived to study and had lived for a time in Kyoto and in and around Edo. He professed to want to settle down in Okazaki and run a good school. Since his youth, diligence and honesty were apparent. It wasn't surprising that a number of girls had shown an interest in marriage, as well as several parents with eligible daughters. This small corner of society had a certain fascination for Muka. The brush seller and his wife treated him kindly, the wife teaching him how to cook and sometimes doing his washing and sewing. All in all, he enjoyed living in the neighborhood. Everybody knew everybody else and all sought out new ways to make their lives interesting. There was always something going on, if not a festival or street dances or a religious celebration, then a funeral or a sick person to be cared for. That evening he passed the brush seller's house as he and his wife were having dinner. With a click of her tongue, the wife said, "Where does he go? He teaches the children in the morning, takes a nap or studies in the afternoon, then in the evening he is gone. He's just like a bat." Her husband chuckled. "What's wrong with that? He's single. You ought not to begrudge him his nightly excursions." In the streets of Okazaki, the sounds of a bamboo flute mingle with the buzzing of captive insects in wooden cages, the rhythmical wail of blind street singers, the cries of vendors of melons and sushi. There was nothing here of the frantic bustle that characterized Edo. Lanterns flickered, people strolled about in summer kimono. In the lingering heat of a summer day, everything seemed relaxed and in its place. As Muka passed, the girls whispered, "There he goes again. Paying no attention to anybody, as usual." Some of the young women bowed to him. They turned to their friends and speculated on his destination. Muka walked straight on past the side streets where he might have purchased the favors of the Okazaki harlots, regarded by many to be one of the chief local attractions along the Tokaido High Road. At the western edge of town, he stopped and stretched, letting the heat out of his sleeves. Ahead of him were the rushing waters of the Yahagi River and the 208-span Yahagi Bridge, the longest on the Tokaido. He walked toward the thin figure waiting for him at the first post. "Musashi?" Musashi smiled at Matahachi, who was wearing his priest's robe. Has the master returned? He asked. No. They walked across the bridge shoulder to shoulder. On a pine-covered hill on the opposite bank stood an old Zen temple. Since the hill was known as Hachijo, the temple had come to be called Hachijoji. They climbed up the dark slope in front of the gate. How are things? Asked Musashi. Practicing Zen must be difficult. It is, replied Matahachi, bowing his bluish shaved head dejectedly. I have often thought of running away. I have to go through mental torture to become a decent human being. I might as well put my if I have to go through mental torture to become a decent human being, I might as well put my head in a noose and forget about it. Don't let it discourage you. You are still only at the beginning. Your real training won't come until after you have appealed to the master and persuaded him to take you as a disciple. It's not always impossible. I have learned to discipline myself a little, and whenever I feel low, I think of you. If you can overcome your difficulties, I should be able to overcome mine. That's the way it should be. There's nothing I can do that you can't do too. Remembering Taguwen helps. If it hadn't been for him, I would have been executed. If you can bear up under hardship, you can experience a pleasure greater than the pain, Musashi said solemnly. Day and night, hour by hour, people are buffeted by waves of pain and pleasure, one after the other. If they try to experience only pleasure, they cease to be truly alive, then the pleasure evaporates. I'm beginning to understand. Think of a simple yawn. The yawn of a person who has been working hard is different from the yawn of a lazy man. Lots of people die without knowing the pleasure yawning can bring. I hear talk like that at the temple. I hope the day soon comes when I turn you over to the master. I want to ask him for guidance too. I need to know more about the way. When do you suppose he will come back? It's hard to say. Zen masters sometimes float around the country like a cloud for 2 or 3 years at a time. Now that you are here, you should resolve to wait 4 or 5 years for him. If it comes to that, you too? Yes, living in that back alley among poor and honest people is good training, part of my education. It's not time wasted. After leaving Edo, Musashi had passed through Atsugi. Then, driven by doubts about his future, he had disappeared into the Tanzawa Mountains, to emerge 2 months later more worried and haggard than ever. Solving one problem only led him to another. At times he was so tortured his sword seemed like a weapon turned against him. Among the possibilities he had considered was choosing the easy way. If he could bring himself to live in a comfortable, ordinary way with Otsu, life would be simple. Almost any thief would be willing to pay him enough to live on, perhaps 500 to 1,000 bushels. But when he put it to himself in the form of a question, the answer was always no. An easy existence imposed restrictions. He could not submit to them. At other times he felt as lost in base, craven illusions as the hungry demons in hell. Then for a time his mind would clear, and he would bask in the pleasure of his proud isolation. In his heart there was a continual struggle between light and dark. Night and day he wavered between exuberance and melancholy. He would think of his swordsmanship and be dissatisfied, thinking of how long the way was, how far he was from maturity. A sickness came over his heart. Other days the mountain life cheered him and his thoughts strayed to Otsu. Coming down from the mountains, he had gone to the Yukioji in Fujisawa for a few days, then on to Kamakura. It was here that he had met Matahachi. Determined not to return to a life of indolence, Matahachi was in Kamakura because of the many Zen temples there, but he was suffering from an even deeper sense of malaise than Musashi. Musashi reassured him, "It's not too late. If you learn self-discipline, you can make a fresh start. It's fatal to tell yourself that it's all over, that you are no good." He felt constrained to add, "To tell the truth, I myself have run up against a wall. There are times when I wonder if I have any future. I feel completely empty. It's like being confined in a shell. I hate myself. I tell myself I'm no good. But by chastising myself and forcing myself to go on, I manage to kick through the shell. Then a new path opens up before me. Believe me, it's a real struggle this time. I'm floundering around inside the shell, unable to do a thing. I came down from the mountains because I remembered a person who I think can help me. The person was the priest Gudo. Matahachi said, "He's the one who helped you when you were first seeking the way, isn't he? Couldn't you introduce me and ask him to accept me as his disciple?" At first, Musashi was skeptical about Matahachi's sincerity, but after hearing that of the trouble he had been in Edo, he decided that he really meant it. The two of them made inquiries about Gudo at a number of Zen temples, but learned little. Musashi knew the priest was no longer at the Myoshinji in Kyoto. He had left several years earlier and traveled for some time in the east and northeast. He also knew he was a most erratic man who might be in Kyoto giving lectures on Zen to the emperor one day and out wandering the countryside the next. Kudo had been known to stop several times at the Hachijoji in Okazaki, and one priest suggested that might be the best place to wait for him. Musashi and Matahachi sat in the little shed where Matahachi slept. Musashi often visited him here and they talked late into the night. Matahachi wasn't allowed to sleep in the dormitory, which, like the other buildings of the Hachijoji, was a rustic, thatch roof affair since he had not yet been officially accepted as a priest. "Oh, these mosquitoes," said Matahachi, waving away smoke from the insect repellent, then rubbing his irritated eyes. "Let's go outside." They walked to the main hall and sat down on the porch. The grounds were deserted and there was a cool breeze. "Reminds me of the Shippoji," said Matahachi, his voice barely audible. "It does, doesn't it?" said Musashi. They fell silent. They always did at times like this. Thoughts of home invariably bringing back memories of Otsu or Osugi or events neither of them wanted to talk about for fear of upsetting their present relationship. But after a few moments, Matahachi said, "The hill the Shippoji was on was higher, wasn't it? There isn't any ancient cryptomeria here, though." He paused, stared for a time at Musashi's profile, then said, diffidently, "There's a request I have been waiting to make, but—" "What is it, Otsu?" Matahachi began, but immediately choked up. When he thought he could manage it, he went on, "I wonder what Otsu doing right now, and what will happen to her. I think of her often these days, apologizing in my heart for what I did. I'm ashamed to admit it, but in Edo, I made her live with me. Nothing happened though. She refused to let me touch her. I guess after I went to Sekigahara, Otsuma has been like a fallen blossom. Now she's a flower blooming on a different tree, in different soil. His face showed his honestness and his voice was grave. Takezo, no, Musashi, I beg you, marry Otsu. You are the only person who can save her. I have never been able to bring myself to say that, but now that I have decided to become a disciple of Gudo, I'm resigned to the fact that Otsu is not mine. Even so, I worry about her. Won't you look for her and give her the happiness she longs for? It was about 3 o'clock in the morning when Musashi started down the dark mountain path. His arms were folded, his head was bowed. Matahachi's words rang in his ears. Anguish seemed to tug at his legs. He wondered how many nights of torment Matahachi must have spent mastering up the courage to speak. Yet it seemed to Musashi that his own dilemma was uglier and more painful. Matahachi, he thought, was hoping to flee from the flames of the past to the cool salvation of enlightenment, trying, like a baby being born, to find in the twofold mysterious pain of sadness and ecstasy a life worth living. Musashi had not been able to say, I can't do that, much less, I don't want to marry Otsu, she's your fiancée. Repent, purify your heart, and win her back. In the end, he had said nothing, for anything he might have said would have been a lie. Matahachi had pleaded fervently, unless I'm sure Otsu will be careful, it will do me no good to become a disciple. You are the one who urged me to train and discipline myself. If you are my friend, save Otsu. That's the only way to save me. Musashi had been surprised when Matahachi had broken down and wept. He hadn't suspected he was capable of such depth of feeling. And when he had stood up to leave, Matahachi clutched his sleeve and begged for an answer. Let me think about it, was all Musashi could say. Now he cursed himself for being a coward and lamented his inability to overcome his inertia. Musashi thought sadly that those who have not suffered from this malady cannot know its agony. It was not a matter merely of being idle, which is often a pleasant state, but of wanting desperately to do something and not being able to. Musashi's mind and eyes seemed dull and empty. Having gone as far as he could in one direction, he found himself powerless either to retreat or to embark on a new path. It was like being imprisoned in a place with no exit. His frustration bred self doubt, recrimination, and tears. Getting angry with himself, recalling all the things he had done wrong, did not help. It was because he was experiencing early symptoms of his ailment that he had parted with Iori and Konosuke and severed ties with his friends in Edo. But his intention to kick through the shell before it was well formed had failed. The shell was still there, enclosing his empty self like the abandoned skin of a cicada. He walked on irresolutely. The wide expanse of the Yahagi River came into view, and the wind coming off the river felt cool on his face. Suddenly, warned by a piercing whistle, he leaped to one side. The shot passed within 5 feet of him, and the report of a musket reverberated across the river. Counting 2 breaths between the bullet and the sound, Musashi concluded the gun had been fired from quite a distance. He jumped under the bridge and clanged bat-like to a post. Several minutes passed before 3 men came running down Hachijo Hill like pine cones driven by the wind. Near the end of the bridge, they stopped and began searching for the body. Convinced he had scored a hit, the musketeer threw away the fuse. He was dressed in darker clothes than the other two and masked, only his eyes visible.